Hello, I'm Arnie Johnston, and this is a virtual reading for the Kalamazoo Public Library. I'd like to thank Karen Trout and Kevin King for the opportunity to do this, and I look forward, after the plague has lifted, to doing a similar reading before a live audience at the public library downtown. I usually begin my readings with a poem by my good late friend and esteemed colleague, John Woods, who taught for many years at Western Michigan University and was one of the finest poets I've ever met. And here it is. It's called At the Reading. The epigraph is, "This is John Woods. You'll understand every word he says." Fred Ekman, Bowling Green State University. I wanted to be so obscure that undergraduates would knock their erupting foreheads on dorm walls. Librarians would write the dean that Hegel and Ramses II were missing again from the shelves. Woods, stop! After a knock on the February door, great critics on all fours, trailing glasses and blood, would beg me to relent for the sake of their obsessions. Awesome, obscure poetry, impenetrable as a fugue in 64th notes. But I was found out for my weakness, undeveloped earlobes, fear of the dark. Each poem says one thing: love me, or else, love me. Wonderful poem. And now I'll read some poems of my own from my new book, which is called Where We're Going, Where We've Been. And I'm going to begin with the title poem, which is a pantoum, and it has as its epigraphs the following. Ed Fredkin thinks the universe is a computer. Robert Wright, Three Scientists and Their Gods. And algorithm, any mechanical or recursive computational procedure. Somewhere in the center of creation, an algorithm generates the cosmos, and everything is information. Spitting binary knots and jackstraws, an algorithm generates the cosmos. Matter and energy change and dance, spitting binary knots and jackstraws in the tick-tock of fate and chance. Matter and energy change and dance, each particle and parcel's destiny in the tick-tock of fate and chance, determined by one cosmic inquiry. Each particle and parcel's destiny, mouse or quark or angel's fall, determined by one cosmic inquiry at the center of it all. Mouse or quark or angel's fall, the best physics is metaphysics. At the center of it all, does an old God teach us new tricks? The best physics is metaphysics, and everything is information. Does an old God teach us new tricks? Somewhere at the center of creation. Here's another sort of algorithmic poem. It's called Sooner Than Later. Sooner than later, he will cease to be, he knows. The fragile network of his cells is closing checkpoints inexorably. Though he's not quite prepared for tolling bells, he knows the fragile network of his cells will work its algorithm and run down spiraling inward like nautilus shells to where end is no verb, but just a noun. Will works its algorithm too, runs down as day flows inescapably to night, and end signifies nothing but a noun when what some call the soul takes its last flight. As day flows inescapably to night, his little life will end its petty creep, and what some call his soul will take its flight where atoms recombine but never sleep. His little life will end its petty creep, shuffled and coiled relativistically where atoms recombine but never sleep, the only way the cosmos sets us free. Shuffled and coiled relativistically, sooner than later, he will cease to be, the only way the cosmos sets us free, closing all checkpoints inexorably. And a somewhat autobiographical poem from long ago called Spoiled Baby. I must have been 6 when my adenoids came out at the Royal Infirmary in Glasgow. We were living at Farm Cross, where 3 roads intersected at the center of the world: Farmloan Road, Dolmarnock Road, and Cambuslang Road. One led to my school, one to Glasgow, one to my grandparents' home. My mother and I had moved there before the end of World War II to get ready for my father's discharge from the Army. Mum told me one day our neighbor's window had been pierced by shrapnel the night before. "Are we winning the war?" I asked her once. "I don't know," she said. But in time we did. There, in Rutherglen, my father's hometown, we lived 2 floors above Grandpa Johnston's ground-level flat. I didn't know about this grandfather who lived downstairs until some neighbor boys pointed him out to me, a shuffling old man with a brown cloth cap, thick white hair, and a handlebar mustache. He and my father never spoke a word to each other in the 5 years we lived there. When I knocked on the door of the old man's flat and introduced myself, he just grunted. After that, I'd say hello when we passed each other on the sidewalk. No melting hearts, no happy reunion of father, son, and grandson. And when the old man died years later, when we were in the U.S., with the McCarthy hearings in full throat, my uncle made a transatlantic call to deliver the news, and my father refused to share costs of the funeral. All that was years ahead, as in my ward at the infirmary, the nurse told me tonsillectomy patients got ice cream, but adenoids didn't deserve that treat. I lay in bed thinking about the dog I'd brought home at my other grandpa's place, a wire-haired terrier, black and tan coat. I'd called him Paddy. His rightful owner claimed him, but not before the dog hauled me down a flight of stairs, later bit my nose. I missed him anyway. And when no one came to visit me, I lay in my bed in the ward, unable to stop my tears. The boy in the next bed knew I was 6 and told me I was just a spoiled baby. The shame I felt stayed with me long after the anesthetic dreams of octopi and the doctor's snipping of my adenoids. My parents kept smoking, and my breathing never did improve until middle age. The kid in the ward was right all along. And another autobiographical fragment called Bookworm. Bader's Drugstore on Kercheval and Gray where I first saw books by Mickey Spillane and the nude Maryland issue of Playboy before puberty drove me insane. While I still loved the Monteith Library and the toasted paper smell of old books, Hugh Lofting, Robert Heinlein, no Harry Potter for decades yet to come, with nooks where I could sit amid the scent of wax polish at leather-topped tables, no cares except homesickness for Scotland in Pax Libris, then return to our place upstairs from the greasy tavern, 3 books in hand, a 10-year-old stranger in a strange land. And continuing the autobiography, a poem called Revelation. You never know when revelation will visit. The short block between our apartment on the drab corner of Kercheval and Springle, above the Blue Ribbon Tavern with its smells of beer and grease, and Bader's Drugstore past the vacant lot at Kercheval and Gray, showed me something about myself one fall day. My father had sent me out to buy something, the Detroit News, aspirin, who knows what, with a $5 bill tucked in my pocket. And I dawdled, thinking about birthdays. I was 10, but I thought I couldn't wait to be 19, which seemed like the perfect age because I knew it meant no more school, leaving me free to read any book I wanted to. But when I arrived on the mosaic tile of Bader's entry, I paused and checked my pocket, then all the others. Empty, of course. I turned and retraced my steps, lingered in the vacant lot between Bader's and home. I spent at least half an hour searching amid grass, weeds, and gravel, knowing that the money was long lost. Strangely, I felt a sense of freedom, poised between loss and retribution. I even found myself whistling, shifting from one foot to the other, realizing that this was somehow what the future held in store, as time would give and take at no one's bidding. And after a while, I turned for home, slow walking toward what might come next. My wife and I spend quite a lot of time on the shores of Lake Michigan, and this is a poem dedicated to that beautiful lake. The Great Revisor. I'm the big lake, Michigami, the Great Revisor. Along the shore each morning, there's a line of water-worn pebbles till hell won't have them. Quartz and tiger-striped agate, blue chert pretending to be agate, Leland blue slag pretending to be blue chert, but often exposing itself with a hole clear through, siderite masquerading as pebble with lightning patterns of calcite in the cracks, Petoskey stones with their subtext of fossilized coral shells, unakite with its streaks of green and pink, horn coral trumpeting at one end, but always making its point like a Paleolithic sonnet. Petrified wood, Charlevoix stone with its little favicitide eyes. No, wait, I say, I meant it to be honeycomb coral or stinkstone, cratered like an asteroid. Moonstone, well, feldspar, not to be confused with quartz. A green and bubbly chunk of Frankfurt slag, crinoids and necklacefuls of little rings, and hosts of other fossils only scholars can identify as I throw them up from my uncatalogued depths all along the third coast. Multicolored pebbles, yes, real pebbles, worn to smoothness by rubbing around in the bottom of my great pocket before I reduce them to grains of sand. And beach glass, the various bottle browns and greens, Bud, Labatt's, Heineken, Newcastle, Leinenkugel, they're all here, but I transform their cliché into smooth little opaque jewels, the frosted white of old gin and vodka bottles, Boodles, Bombay, Tanqueray, Beefeater, Grey Goose, Absolute, and Stoli, Scotch and bourbon, too, J&B, Dewar's, Johnny Walker, and the whole parade of single malts. I sing the seltzer blues, too, bromo and alka, with milk of magnesia on the side, and the rare and delicate amethyst of old mason jars. Driftwood, of course, delicate and skeletal, or thick and sodden, moss and weed, drinking straws, the cups they came in, condoms, hypodermics, beach toys, dying bees and ladybugs, and farther out, kayaks, canoes, skiffs, schooners, cabin cruisers, fishing boats, freighters and ferries, and their leavings, cargoes and crews. And far beyond the shipping lanes, full fathom 50, who knows what's there in my depths, to be revised tomorrow morning. The long line of the shore, the metrics of the tide, alliteration of the waves, beauty and dross, connections churning out of all I am. Collective unconscious, don't get me started. This is another pantoum called Then to Now. In cryptic images from alchemy, Jung saw a bridge from then to now, a rainbow span, not the epitome of crackpot science and arcane know-how. Jung saw a bridge from then to now in damn near every rendering of crackpot science and arcane know-how, from art and physics all the way to the I Ching. In damn near every rendering, Jung saw alchemy's power of transformation from art and physics all the way to the I Ching. And in the heat required for sublimation, Jung saw alchemy's power of transformation in the creative force of love. And in the heat required for sublimation, alchemy and art work hand in glove. In the creative force of love, the every only God makes certain that alchemy and art work hand in glove to help reveal what lies beyond the curtain. The every only God makes certain our crackpot fancies and arcane know-how can help reveal what lies beyond the curtain and trace the alchemy of love from then to now. This is a sonnet that celebrates the Scottish New Year. It's called The Poet Celebrates Scots New Year, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, because 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is midnight on New Year's Eve in Scotland. Anyway, here's the poem. Each New Year's Eve at 7, long before that ball of light brings chaos to Times Square, and people for whom Auld Lang Syne's no more than nonsense sing and link hands everywhere, his wife and he sit quietly and think of Hogmanay in Scotland, kith and kin, and parties past, first footers coming in for currant bun or shortbread and a drink, whiskey for men and sherry for the wives. They toast their absent friends, eat sweetmeats too. He sips on malt, though she prefers champagne. This moment's pause before their year rings new at midnight, stirs a song, and helps maintain the ties of Auld Lang Syne that link their lives. This poem is called Radioactive, inspired by a piece called Soap and Juice, mixed media piece by Ray Bukowski, and also by Radioactive, lyrics by Imagine Dragons. And the lines from Imagine Dragons' song is, all systems go, the sun hasn't died, deep in my bones, straight from inside. She laughs and sings, he's radioactive, as if the dragons had imagined me. This is one of the charms of doing a virtual reading. Someone just came to the door, so I had to pause in the middle of the poem, and I will restart it. This is a sonnet called Radioactive, inspired by a mixed media piece by Ray Bukowski called Soap and Juice, and by Radioactive, the lyrics by Imagine Dragons. And those lyrics are, all systems go, the sun hasn't died, deep in my bones, straight from inside. And here's the poem. She laughs and sings, he's radioactive, as if the dragons had imagined me. She's hoping my cores become redactive, made sound by sounding, seeded, cancer-free. The sound of laughter is what we need these days to make sure that my inward juices flow. Distraction is the soundest way to phase ill thoughts and tidings no one wants to know. Soap and water, pills to keep at bay post-op infection from the robot drill, to make sure that I'm ready for the fray with her who keeps me safe by force of will and sings, whoa, he's radioactive. Whoa, he's radioactive. And here is a poem I wrote because I was looking at our balcony in South Haven and watching what was going on out there. It's called Sparrows. 1. Sparrows, like feathered mice, mate on our balcony. She seems detached from the process, but he flutters above her tail, engaged by the imperatives of their nature and ours. 2. Flowers on the patio, sheltered from the autumn breeze. Sparrows flying to and fro. Flowers on the patio. Won't last long, the sparrows know. Soon November nights will freeze flowers on the patio, sheltered from the autumn breeze. 3. On the balcony, a sparrow, feathers fluffed out, ready for winter, watching from my warm sofa. I wish I could say the same. 4. In Jamaica years ago, a friend asked her waiter, what are those little birds fluttering on the terrace? He said, we call them sparrows, Mom. And here's another balcony sonnet called Romeo and Juliet from the Balcony. Couples when new all feel the urge to touch each other as they walk from place to place, grazing, nudging, fondling, though not too much, lest friction lead to a full-on embrace before they're ready. But quite soon they'll be, and then the touching will go on for years, or so they hope. For over time they'll see their hopes transmuted by their unwept tears. We watch them walking on a small town street, he shuffling well ahead and she behind, 5 steps or so, intent on her own beat, and no one knows what either has in mind. We spy them from our balcony above and thank our stars we're old and still in love. Now I'd like to jump back to a poem I wrote some years ago. It was inspired by an untitled twig and fired ceramic piece by the wonderful artist Maria Scott. and it now stands on our mantelpiece in South Haven, Michigan, thanks to her generosity. It's called What's Underneath. Frail bars sunk deep in stone, tempered by fire, that could reduce a wooden grid to ash, leaving just the bedrock. We never tire of raising cages, walls. We twine and lash our rickety contrivings, groove and route, knowing the earth we build on will endure. What we create to hold life in or out will fall, will fail, of that we may be sure. Consumed at length by fire, flood, decay, or fresh mischief. For they'll huff and they'll puff and they'll blow the house down. There is no way to keep the wolf from the door, not enough of straw, sticks, bricks that we can hope to shore against time's ruin. Thus, Grandma prepares to face the fiend in sheep's disguise before Red Riding Hood, known too by what she wears, brings her woodsman, flesh or tin, to spill blood, felling Grandma's bane. And how can we say what grew within the wolf, from seed to bud to flower, will not rise up in us someday? We need diversion, and we look elsewhere, to munchkins, flying monkeys, talking trees, tornadoes whirling us from here to there, beyond the rainbow to our destinies. But when we've danced through, over, or around each hindrance to the Emerald City's gate, what lurks beyond the light and smoke and sound? Our mortal self, our sad and comic fate, pretentious oracle revealing all despite congenital dishonesty, showing the truth of our fortunate fall. We own the power of choice that makes us free, showing us too, there is no place like home, the archetypal shrink guiding us back to what lies hidden near the beaten track, the earthen bed, the pillow made of stone. And at a time of disaster, this poem also seems appropriate because it's about disaster and the power of love. It's called Spectators as We Are. Sleet patters across my car's window in the South Beach parking lot. Sitting here hand in hand, we lament spring's slow sweep up the coastline from Chicago. You're not sure I want to be with you. You know I'm capable of running, and you're angry. You point out how few years we may have, and I can't argue. You press on. We should think of each day as the last gift we'll get. I'm nodding, but I know we seldom find a way to live our lives like that, and I say, we're never ready for disaster. For even when we know what's coming, foreknowledge never helps us master our fate. Like the poor drunk bastard at the local wine fest, the bozo thought he'd end the night's fun by walking around the city parking ramp's low parapet. Falling, he said, "Oh no." Could it be he really didn't know, despite his friends and his wife's pleading, that he might plunge 60 feet onto the dark pavement down there? And if so, can his brief fall convince us that we ourselves, when life finds us performing our own crazy stunts, will probably feel the same thrill of surprise to be dying too? How can it slip our minds? Or can a part of us be lying that we forget how frail a tie binds us to the real world? What is it blinds us at such moments? Perhaps the sense that we're immortal, or just watching our own lives, as if experience might be a TV show, more intense perhaps, but no more real. Remember the man who was videotaping skydivers, and who, as their shoots were blossoming below in the cold air, stepped out to join them. What the tape shows is the cameraman's realizing that he has no shoot. We know he knows when he looks down and the picture goes crazy. As long as nothing is real, the camera is focused, recording everything. But when he starts to feel for his ripcord and his veins congeal, he spurns vision like a false lover. And now we sit together watching Lake Michigan from the dry cover of my Toyota. Seagulls hover above the waves that attack the dock. Neither birds nor gray water caring about us or each other. We talk of all this, and of people who walk out on the pier to see the lake's show of power, despite weather warnings and common sense. Now and then we know someone's swept away and sucked below, battered by the waves and drowned. And I wonder if, when they find they're breathing water and know they're about to die, they spend a moment wondering why their lives seemed like something they had paid to watch, all the moments unfolding like someone else's story. They made the choices, you say. They could have stayed where they were safe and warm. Whatever they believed, life wasn't happening to them. We make it happen. Never forget that. You can be too clever on the subject, brood too much over whys and wherefores, and avoid choosing your own turning points, wife or lover, here or there. You know you can't cover all the bets. You can't have certainty. It's all a risk. There's no real knowing till you try. Some risks are bad, but we aren't one of them. So there. That's me all over, as you know, spectator and recorder, but seldom acting for myself, habitual waiter on eventual turns of fate or chance. So I'm the one I'm speaking of, who thinks life can be lived by waiting for someone else to decide when love is over. My doubt goes hand in glove with your certainty. And yet, we lay this morning on the beach, sheltering behind a low dune, watching the way snow formed brief stars on your coat. You'd say it's the best image I could have drawn. With that thought, I start the car. Nearing the road, we glance back at the lake. One gull hangs there. You smile, and I drive on. Two last poems, both to my beautiful wife, Debbie. One is called The Poet Contemplates a Shrine. A shrine to her sits on the 7-drawer chest in their bedroom in this resort town. Photos slipped into the twists of metal monkeys' tails, her younger selves all looking at him as he picks socks and underwear from the drawers below. Before the photos, lake stones sit, smooth Devonian corals, Petoskey's, Charlevoix stones, crinoids, chert, reminders that their time here is no more than a fraction of what's gone before them. A wallet size of her at 17 smiles down front, forever beyond his reach, although she's showering just steps away. They met in her 4th decade and his 5th, and they agree that if that 17-year-old beauty and he had been lucky enough to cross paths back then in their youth, they'd have been a love story ever since. He'll never hold that young girl in his arms, but he still gets to hold her every day. And they know that whatever the lake leaves on the shore for them to find, whether it's coral, beach glass, or pebbles, he and she will search together when at last they go. And Deborah, always. always Deborah. Deborah, when the day begins. At the end of day, Deborah. Deborah, when it all began, like falling in a river, carried in the rush, Deborah. A friend asked, "Did you ever try to swim ashore?" Our only answer, "Have you ever fallen like that, been carried away?" Love-drunk acrobats, we found dactylic rhythm in the moon glow of cheap motels, Deborah, Deborah, Deborah. And when I tried to leave to opt for what I thought was sanity, I had to take the train because I knew I couldn't drive myself without turning back. But its dactyls would not stop muttering, Deborah, Deborah, Deborah. And after a night of lying, denying the current now within, what Plato told me, what E. Cummings certainly told me, I threw myself into the morning train, its shining rails, the current sweeping me back to Deborah, Deborah, mother and warrior, judge, bringer of peace, champion of women, Deborah, wife and lover, Deborah, artist and partner, Deborah, Deborah, writer of the hard parts, tender of heart, quick to weep, Deborah, Deborah, teacher and counselor, folk singer's girlfriend, Deborah, beauty and survivor, Deborah, grave and frivolous, Deborah, irresistible current, Deborah, 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 when it all began. At the end of day, Deborah, Deborah, when the day begins, always Deborah. Thank you so much for this opportunity to read.